Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And welcome to another Capitol Live event brought to you by Spotlight PA. I'm Joanna Bernstein, the Development Director of Spotlight PA, and thanks again for joining us tonight. For those of you who are new to our work or programming, Spotlight PA is an independent, nonpartisan newsroom producing investigative and accountability journalism about the state capitol and urgent statewide issues. We share all of our journalism at no cost with more than 80 other newsrooms across the state, all part of our mission to better inform and empower all Pennsylvanians. Our work is driven by a deep sense of public service, and it's powered by you, our readers and our members. None of our work is possible without your support. We're not like other newsrooms in Pennsylvania. We're blazing a new path forward for collaborative public service journalism supported by the public, serving the public, and reflective of the needs and concerns of the public. So I have an important request today. We need just 15 people to step forward now and make a contribution to Spotlight PA so we can break even on this event and continue our vital coverage. So I'd like to pause here a moment and ask anyone who has the means to please make a gift now at spotlightpa.org/donate. That's spotlightpa.org/donate. Your contributions help us keep this programming free and available to all Pennsylvanians because access to information shouldn't depend on someone's income. If you're here today and you value this work and you can afford to support it, we need your help. So again, as we introduce tonight's event, please take a moment and give now at spotlightpa.org/donate. If you're already a member, thank you so much. You've helped make all of this work possible. Lastly, a few housekeeping notes. We are recording today's event to share with those who can't make it. Thank you to all who have sent questions in advance. If you have not yet asked a question, you can do so using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the toolbar here on the screen. We will get to as many questions as we can towards the end of our event. And now I'm going to turn things over to Ed Machen, who will be moderating today's event. Take it away, Ed.
Good evening, and thank you so much, Joanna. Thank you to everyone in the audience. If you have a question or comment, please drop it in the chat, and we will do our best to get it in front of our panelists. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, Shalon James has been a member of the PA Medical Marijuana Advisory Board since it formed in 2017. She's a mental health educator and advocate, and her work has focused on increasing equity and access for underserved and marginalized communities. She currently consults for a housing aid center that houses LGBTQ homeless youth. Shalon was also a guest on one of our panels in the fall. So Shalon, welcome back.
Thank you.
Great. And then next, Dr. Mary Frances Kester is a physician from Lackawanna County. Her training and background is in emergency medicine. She started her own telehealth practice, Cannabis Care Consultants, in 2020. And she was one of the medical marijuana physicians who spoke to us in detail for our latest investigation, which described Pennsylvania's uneven advertising rules. And lastly, Judith Castle is an attorney who specializes in medical marijuana issues. She represents growers, dispensaries, laboratories, physicians, and others. She's worked with clients in Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and states across the country. And she's taken on pro bono clients in housing discrimination cases, and she's taught at Widener School of Law. Thank you all so much for joining us. So we're here tonight to talk about PA's medical marijuana advertising rules. As we described in our recent investigation, businesses that offer to help people receive a medical marijuana card can promote themselves on the radio, run newspaper ads, dominate Google searches, and offer discounts on sites like Groupon. But individual physicians and small practices aren't allowed to do the same. And in fact, they can face harsh penalties if they advertise their power to approve patients for the program. The Department of Health, we found, has sent roughly a dozen warning letters to physicians, often for statements on their own websites describing basic services and qualifications. So Shalon, I want to turn to you first as a member of the board. Has the Department of Health explained its advertising enforcement approach to the board?
Not in detail. We are aware that it exists, and So here's what we know. There, in the beginning, back in 2017, there were a number of different types of legislation and types of conversation about how to best protect doctors and make it safe for doctors to feel like they could provide the service and getting the certification for the medical marijuana card. Out of that grew a concern by some of the doctors and many doctors that we heard from, that they were being over inundated with an influx of calls coming in for the medical marijuana service. And so then the law and the board had conversation about how do we best protect doctors, so that they aren't over inundated and they can't give their regular services now because their phone lines are being inundated with individuals looking for medical marijuana cards. Is it fair? Probably not. And this is Shalon speaking on behalf of Shalon, as Shalon is an advocate. It doesn't serve its purpose for everybody involved now. I understand why it's in place. Maybe it's time for a new opportunity to look at how it's impacting everybody in general. And for my purposes, how it's impacting the consumer, to being able to access and have fair, equal access to the physicians that are providing the certifications.
Yeah, and as a patient advocate on the board, how is this ban affecting patients, or what are your concerns about how it's affecting patients?
Yeah, so you're basically left to kind of search out and find who the doctors are. So if there's no advertisement, and we know that, like, when you're looking at TV and when you're looking at listening to the radio and scrolling on the internet, when those ads pop up, that's what draws you into finding the right people. I think there was a level of concern to make sure that individuals were going to the right people, and so that information is housed. And because you don't want people going to people that really aren't certified. You don't want them going to people that really aren't doctors. And so I get that. However, does everybody have access to that information? Does everybody have access to who they can go to be able to get them a legit certification for a medical marijuana card? I don't think that is the case.
And then, Mary Frances, I want to talk to you about some of these issues as a doctor in the program. But first, why did you decide to become a medical marijuana physician?
Yeah, honestly, it was during COVID. Slightly prior to COVID, I'd run into another emergency medicine doctor who was doing it. I didn't know anything about it. And she started talking to me about it, the patients she was helping. She said it was more rewarding than the ER, and I couldn't believe it. I kind of put it on the back burner. But when COVID hit and we could do telehealth and the ER slowed down so much that I wasn't working as much in the ER, I started looking more into it and decided, what the heck, this might be, the sign. It's something for me to do. And it's been really one of the most rewarding things I ever have done. She was right. Marijuana medicine and my patients are so wonderful, and they bring me hope and joy every day when I hear how life-changing marijuana has been for them.
And how does the advertising ban affect you and your patients?
It's nearly impossible to advertise cannabis world as it is, right? Just because of federal restrictions. And then you take it another level where, it's even harder because I can't even say my name. And so a lot of patients want to know who their doctor is. Who is Cannabis Care Consultants, because we're a lot different than these big companies that we're talking about. This is a physician-run practice. You will see me every year. I know you. And they can't find that out. They can't find out who I am or who any other marijuana doctor is, because if we say it, we're quote unquote advertising. So it's not even about, these large organizations spending $150,000 a month that I don't have in big markets, but about they're not doctors. They're, a link between them and somebody they're contracting. And they can't really investigate that. They can't find out for themselves, who am I going to? Is this somebody who I want to be with? Because we can't even say we exist.
Yeah, and then if you can talk about, I mean, some of the consequences that physicians do face if they allegedly break the advertising rules.
Yeah, I mean, I got sent threatening letters, threatening my medical license. It's funny, we can, not saying we want to commit malpractice, but there are some really harmful things that physicians can do, not purposely, but can really cause harm and not have their license threatened. And I put my name on my website and I had my license threatened. That's awful.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Again, I appreciate your taking the time and speaking with us and telling those details in the story as well. Shalon, has the board received complaints from patients or doctors about this ban? And if so, how do they attract these types of complaints?
I have not personally received any complaints. I do know that the complaints are often in just trying to ascertain where you can get a certification. So like, who is a doctor? And so I always use myself as an example. So like, my son has sickle cell disease. His treating physician may or may not be a prescribing doctor in Pennsylvania. So I have to go in, I have to ask. And then if that doctor, say his doctor does not want him to use medical marijuana, then they aren't going to tell me who I can go to get it. And now I'm left to research other options for my kid and track it down. There are some doctors that'll say, hey, you should check with Dr. So-and-so because I heard that they are, but it's a really tight-lipped system and how to get it. That's not effective. It's really not effective. And for me, it's always about where's the money going. And so, when you look at who's allowed to advertise and who isn't, the money's going to where the bucks are being made.
Yeah, and then Attorney Castle, I want to get your perspective as an attorney. So I have a few questions for you about all these issues, but first, can you tell the audience briefly about your practice? Who do you typically represent, and what are some of the issues that your clients are typically seeking help with?
Yes, and thanks. I work for Hawk McEwen and SNISCAC. I'm a partner there and have created a practice group called Cannabis Law PA. We practice or we assist clients like growers, processors, dispensaries, laboratories, physician groups across New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Maryland, and in other states as well when we help obtain a permit for a client. It's disconcerting what Mary Frances and Shalon had just relayed, but absolutely truthful, and it's absolutely my experience that there's this real frustration. And some of the reason is that the same prohibitions that Mary Frances is under, grower processors and dispensaries are not. So I hear her pain. In fact, right now we're talking to several physicians across the state and seeing whether there's a legitimate issue that we could file a complaint with the Department of Health or with the Commonwealth Court in Pennsylvania, which is the unique court that handles those type of issues. Not only is the prohibition inconsistent, but it's inconsistent with the First Amendment right and also additional statutes that protect Mary Frances's right to have commercial speech. There's a case that was decided in the Ninth Circuit in 2002, Cognac v. Waters, and it was when a physician was being investigated and prosecuted for recommending medical marijuana. That physician won in the Ninth Circuit because the Ninth Circuit decided that a physician has a right to free speech. They're not selling marijuana, they're recommending it, and their right to recommend it is protected by free speech and the doctor-patient privilege. Now, the Ninth Circuit isn't precedential here in the Third Circuit, but certainly it is the law of the land because since 2002, not a single investigatory or prosecutorial case has been brought against a physician for recommending marijuana.
And yeah, just that, it's interesting you bring that up. What do you think would be the main argument if you were to bring that forward as a lawsuit, as a complaint?
Well, it is more difficult than some of the lawsuits we have been very successful bringing against the Department of Health because the prohibition is actually lodged within the act, the initial legislation. So it's not just in the regulations. So we would have to tack it on First Amendment rights and commercial free speech rights. It doesn't really make a lot of sense why the physicians are prohibited from advertising. And as pointed out, simply even saying their name. And as Shalon has pointed out clearly, this is a detriment to patients. Now, patients can find doctors' names on the DOH website, but what happens is that there's now some nefarious, what I would consider nefarious or fraudulent entities that are setting up shop on the web, literally stripping all the information off the DOH website about doctors like Mary Frances, setting up a fake website where when, let's say you go onto the DOH website and you see Mary Frances and you want to go to her. So you Google search, what comes up is this fake website with her name on it. She's not authorized you, that entity, to use her name. And then when you go and click to go into her name, they bait and switch you to a different doctor. So that different doctor is actually getting the business. Well, that's tortious interference from what would naturally be a customer or a patient that would be going to Mary Frances. So we do think there's multiple legal issues that we could file a claim upon.
Okay, sounds good. And then, Mary Frances, in public comments last year, you urged the Department of Health to investigate medical marijuana certification companies. Can you talk about what are your concerns with these companies?
Absolutely. So it's multifactorial, really. So one, they aren't a doctor-run organization, right? And they contract out doctors. And, God forbid if they go after these doctors, and I don't want them to, because, you don't have to have medical records. There's no background check to make sure that you're ensuring good quality patient care with them. One, and two, the doctors get paid a fourth of what the company is charging. Okay, so if they charge $200, the doctor might get paid $50. To make it worse, they don't pay the doctor if they certify, or if they don't certify, the patient. That creates a little bit of a moral hazard in my world, because it's much harder to say no to somebody than it is to say yes, right? And there's no, I've had patients call me that aren't mine, like panicking because they need a doctor's note for work to say that they're safe to go to work. And they call these companies and they basically just throw them under the bus and say, you've got to contact the doctor that certified you, but there's no way to get in touch with that doctor. There's no record of it. And so they're stuck, and I feel so bad. I'm like, if you're my patient, I will most certainly write you one, but I can't write you one. I don't know you. And to that, I did work for one of these companies, so I can tell you, they told me they were keeping my records, and I have emails of them saying they're keeping my records because I wanted to make sure that I had notes on my patients should I ever need to go back and have continuity of care with somebody. And it was like hitting a brick wall. They did not have them at all. Fortunately, I had saved some on a personal protected Google account when I started getting a little suspicious. But that's not the way it should be. I thought they were keeping medical records. That's what they implied to me, and they weren't. And so, there's really a number of levels of where I feel that these companies are just harmful to patient care. And I don't think they should, of all the regulations that we have in this, that should be one of them. If you're going to have a company, it should be a practice, a medical practice, not some large company contracting out doctors who are blind to the errors they are making, to be quite honest with you, in patient care. And, who knows what their qualifications are other than just being able to certify in Pennsylvania. And, Shalon's point before, you can't, there's no fake doctors out there, right? You have to go through the course. The state has to check you out. You have to, in order to get into the system to certify somebody, you do have to be a registered marijuana physician. But what does that entail? And who is it that you're going to? In order to get a card, I can't certify myself. I can't certify my father. I can't be a caregiver for somebody, which is ridiculous. So I have been to some other places and seen the quality of care that you get. And it's like, on one occasion, it was a doctor on her cell phone standing like, okay, yep, all right. She's not typing in a medical record. She doesn't know. She doesn't really care. And she certifies me. That's not good patient care, And so that's where it goes back to the advertising thing, is really putting who I am and why I care about my patients on my website advertising. And so that's where I have a problem with these companies, of all the regulations, like I said, we're focusing on the wrong thing. We are not prescribing drugs. These regulations they have that I can't certify my father, or I can't certify myself, or I can't be a caregiver, those stem from opioid regulations that we have in the law. Okay. And I get that. I should not be prescribing, 60 oxycodone to my family member. There may be a conflict there, but we are not prescribing. We are making recommendations. I'm saying he's got a qualifying condition and he could use a medical marijuana card. It is then up to him to go to the dispensary and talk to the pharmacist there to determine what product is best for him. So,
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and so Shalon, I want to ask you sort of a broader question. The vast majority of physicians in the state don't participate in Pennsylvania's medical marijuana program. I believe there are about 1,800 approved medical marijuana physicians as of March. There are tens of thousands of doctors not participating. What could the state do to increase participation among doctors?
I think they are right now working on that. There are research that is starting to take place. I think a lot of doctors just need the research to support being able to be fully on board with this. And then there's always going to be, and I think we talked about this in the fall, there's always that fear of federal oversight because marijuana is still classified the way that it is federally. And so there's just an overall fear. And so if we can fix research and have doctors get the right research and know that what they're doing actually helps what they're prescribing for and what they're certifying medical marijuana for, that's going to be a big hurdle. And then some protections for doctors that say, okay, like, we're going to protect you, or federally, can we get those laws changed federally to make sure that we can get the classification change. I mean, we get that classification change federally, it'll open up a whole different realm of the way we're able to function, not just in our state, but across the country with getting people the medical marijuana that they need. My fear, and to Mary Frances's point, my fear is that there is no continuity of care. And so my job is to make sure that an individual has the best care possible. So again, using my son as an example, if his doctor isn't willing to certify his condition, and so now he's on medical marijuana, and I can't get in contact with that doctor, if he's in crisis at the hospital and he's in a sickle cell crisis and I can't get in touch with the doctor that's certified, or the pharmacist that's at the doctor that said he could have X amount of milligrams of medical marijuana, that's problematic. That's not going to be the best person to certify him would be the doctor that's treating him on a regular basis. I mean, it's just common sense. So we have to do the things to make sure that people can access the doctors. But again, I know that what has happened is doctors have gotten over inundated, and we got this slew of complaint from doctors saying, I'm being over inundated. And so now there's this pushback and say, wait, but I think there's always unintended consequences when you act really quickly, put things in, and you don't really think about it. And so now we have this unintended consequence of one group is able to advertise, the other isn't, and it's affecting patient care. Whenever these things happen, the patient's always the one to suffer. And that's the sucky part about all of this.
And then Judith, I want to ask you about, Shalon mentioned some of the federal issues. Marijuana is still illegal under federal law, and we reported on conflict between federal and state rules for medical marijuana and the harm that can create for patients. You've represented clients in housing discrimination cases. More broadly, if you can just talk about what are some of the barriers that still exist for medical marijuana patients today? That can be employment, housing, some of the issues they're encountering.
Right, you hit on some of them. I get calls daily about employment issues, and the statute itself and the regulations really aren't helpful guides for either side of that scenario. In one section, it talks about not being able to be denied a job or fired, or even lose your license if you're a practicing physician, et cetera, just because you're involved in this marijuana program. But on the other side, they say to employers, well, you don't have to make accommodations for someone who uses medical marijuana. And there's some problems with that because unlike alcohol, medical marijuana can stay in your system for weeks. And so therefore, even if you're not using it on the job, if your employer tests, well, you can be test positive even though you're not under the influence. So they're still trying to hash that out and try to figure out a good way to come up with how to determine whether someone's using on the job. But above that, obviously there's housing. The case that I took on was where a Section 8 housing client was denied housing based on her use of medical marijuana. She had everything legally used. So there's that. There's also 280E tax repercussions where medical marijuana entities are taxed at about an 80% tax rate because they don't get to deduct their business expenses. There's safe banking problems because banks can't really, without horrible onerous requirements, they can't really touch this and this program, this industry. So a lot of it's in cash, which just invites more nefarious issues. I see Shalon shaking her head, yes. So we have like a myriad of issues around patient access and health and safety, but also about profitability. I mean, I'm sure Mary Frances can attest to this. Medical marijuana is one of the gateways out of opioid addiction. First of all, by prescribing it before you even prescribe opioids, but then also I think there's some studies out there that have some promising indications that it will help take people from an opioid addiction through the withdrawal, et cetera, and be beneficial. So there's like all these different, issues buzzing around. Some of them, most of them all have legal impacts, but like Shalon said, it's the patient that gets impacted on all these issues. And that's the real travesty.
And then I want to ask everybody, multiple experts we've talked to have said Pennsylvania's blanket advertising ban is a rare one. Of Pennsylvania's neighbors, only West Virginia has a similar ban, and regulators there allow physicians to note on websites that they can approve patients for the program. So what should physicians be allowed to say, and in what ways should they be allowed to say it? I'll start with Mary Frances as a physician.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should be allowed to say I'm a medical marijuana physician first and foremost. Shalon saying she can't find anybody because I can't tell you what I do. How can a patient find a doctor if I can't tell you that I'm a medical marijuana physician? That's first and foremost, and beyond that, put your mission statement out, why you do it, what you care about, what your passions are in regards to it, with your practice, like mine is continuity of care is a big one for me. My returning patients pay much less because I don't want them doctor shopping. And I understand that there's, financial limitations. I want to say that's because I care about you and I want continuity of care and why I think medical marijuana is good. So I just think being allowed to say what we do is the biggest, thing Pennsylvania can do right now. On a federal level, it would be really nice to then be able to advertise that online or on the internet, but that's actually more of a federal issue than it is the state of Pennsylvania. And moreover, I think dealing with these companies that I feel are really damaging and harmful to the program, to the legitimacy of the program, and to marijuana medicine in general, need to be addressed.
Yeah, thank you. And then Judith, what do you think physicians should be allowed to say, and how should they be allowed to say it?
Well, that's the quintessential question. And DOH is free to put down very specific guidelines under which a doctor or physician would have to comply, but there's nothing. There's just this ban prohibition. Personally, I think I agree with Mary Frances. They should be able to say everything an OBGYN says or a heart surgeon says, you don't go on to, you don't Google doctors and then not know whether you're talking to a dentist or a knee surgeon. You have to know who you're talking to and why you're talking to them. So it's silly that there's this ban, and yet we expect patients to kind of feel in the dark and try to find doctors that they can go to. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And then, Shalon, what do you think they should be able to say, and how can they say it?
Yeah, common sense. So just like Judith said, just like Mary, you have to be able to say what you do. And so I get that they don't want people doctor shopping, but maybe that's how you get more people to get onto the program and get certified, because if they know that their other people are going to their colleagues because they don't certify, then maybe that'll get them to get on the bandwagon. That's number one. Number two, different doctors do different things. I wouldn't go to a reconstruction surgeon and who specializes on facial reconstruction if I need something done to my leg. It's just silly. On the website, they advertise like I am a specialist in facial reconstruction. I wouldn't go to somebody that works on legs. Like, it just, they're two different specialties. They're two different things. So common sense wise, you should at least be able to say, I have been certified by the Department of Health to certify for medical marijuana. Here is the link where you can check it on their website and send them directly to the Department of Health link where they can verify it and certify the patient, provide continuity of care, go from there. Like, it's just silly. The patient is best protected in that way if they can shop, just like we shop everything else in the world. We shop for appliances, everything else in the world we shop for, and we look for what's the best deal, who has it, who does it, who doesn't. It's just silly. It's just silly to me.
And then, Judy, do you think this is a legislative need to fix this, or do you think the Department of Health could fix this through its own regulations process?
Yeah, great question. And I think it is a legislative fix. Like I said, this prohibition's in the act. It's not something DOH just came up with. And they cite to that probably in the letters that are going out to the decisions. I also want to say that in the absence of being allowing physicians to advertise is where these consulting services crop up, and they are doing more disservice than service. So to that end, I think you're allowing, by gagging physicians, you're allowing this other not so good service to flourish. And I think patients may get kind of bamboozled there. And if you have physicians, like Shalon just said, if you have physicians advertising their services and their rates, you might get very competitive. And therefore, that's also going to benefit patients, less expensive visits.
Great, and that brings us. So we have a bunch of great audience questions, so I want to get to some of those. I built a little more time into for audience questions than I originally expected because we have so many good ones. First one we have, what is the average fee for consultation with an approved physician to receive a recommendation as a medical marijuana patient? I have heard $250. This is from Jeffrey. So yeah, if anybody wants to speak to that, sort of what they hear about the average cost for a certification, which then allows you to get a medical marijuana card.
Well, I will say legally, you're not allowed to charge for the certification. You can charge for your visit, and whatever your visit is, you can charge for that. But technically, you're not supposed to say, well, if I give you a certification, back to what Mary Frances said, it's kind of incentivizing the wrong thing there. A doctor should be free to diagnose and determine what, what path they want to put you on continuity of care.
So therein lies the problem. So what we have heard is that individuals, because you can't charge for the certification, I'm going to charge you for the consultation. I'm going to charge you to come into my office. And that price can range from $200 to $1,000. You go into some of the smaller rural areas in Pennsylvania, and there's only one doctor there that's certified to do it. They can now charge whatever it is they want because they are in high demand.
I definitely
do you like it? No. But it happens.
That was definitely happening from what I've heard from my patients, like being charged $450 because there's one doctor in town, or a doctor would come through town so doctors were actually kind of touring around cities because cities didn't have doctors in them. With the advent of telehealth, I think we've really opened up the market to more competition, if you will, and price controls. I've heard anywhere from $150 to $250 or $300, whatever it's going to be. Like I said, the more competition, the more it's going to improve. But the issue right now is that, like, I have to charge a decent amount to it costs me money to maintain a website, to have malpractice just for this, because it's not on my ER malpractice, right? There are costs to it. So we do have to charge something. And unless I can fill my day with patients, I need to charge a higher cost because it's the cost of getting them, showing up on Google, trying to get content, SEO, sending out emails and all that. So I do think by allowing again, trying to decrease that cost. If I could get more patients in, by being able maybe to advertise, say who I am. Again, federal laws are prohibitive with that. It might bring down that cost, but I would say right now you're probably at the 150 to 250 for an initial certification, and probably about 100 to 150 for renewals.
Yeah, very interesting. And yeah, I'll just add, I think in the Department of Health, they were proposing some regulations in their initial draft. They proposed some language about not charging excessive fees. That initial draft didn't define what excessive fees was. So that's something else that I'll be looking out for in some of our reporting. We have another great question. How would legalizing recreational marijuana affect this issue? Do you think there's a concern that patients are manipulating the medical marijuana loophole? I think that's from Eliza. Shalon, yeah, your perspective about how would recreational marijuana affect some of these issues we talked about?
I'm not sure how much it'll affect the issues, because I think, and this is just my personal opinion, Pennsylvania is always going to have their hand in the legalities of this, just like they do with alcohol. So there's going to be I'm not sure if it will change a whole lot. I think access will probably change a little bit. And then if everybody can get it, then we don't have people that are certifying it. But then does it become safe anymore? There's going to be some oversight. Somebody's going to have some oversight. And my feeling is it's going to be Pennsylvania and the Pennsylvania legislation that's going to have the oversight of it. Because again, you want it to be safe. So.
Yeah, Judy and then Mary Frances, your thoughts about how legalizing recreational marijuana, which has happened in New York, New Jersey, I think Maryland is going to have a ballot initiative. Any thoughts on how that would affect this advertising issue or just the medical marijuana program in general?
Yeah, sure. If we do legalize adult use or recreational in Pennsylvania and we don't fix this problem, there may be a migration of patients leaving the medical program and going to the adult use program, because if they don't have that loyalty to the physician and that continuity of care, and they're really getting treatment for their conditions instead of self-treating, I think you're going to have that migration. The only thing to stop it is how much tax the state puts on adult use in excess of what the state is taxing medical. But I do think that this is an important issue that it needs to be resolved before we move into adult use.
Yeah, Mary Frances, as a physician in the program, do you have any thoughts about the potential of recreational legalization?
Yeah, I have to agree with Judith. We do need to resolve this issue first and foremost. And I think we do need to incentivize medicinal patients to go to a doctor and go to a medicinal dispensary, because what's going to happen otherwise is they're going to quote unquote self-medicate. And that's not good for them. It's not good for the program, and it's not the point of the program. Marijuana has amazing medicinal purposes. I mean, it is just a truly incredible plant that can help so many people when used properly. And that's where the importance of having pharmacists and, medical marijuana physicians on board to help guide the patient, and knowledgeable physicians and knowledgeable pharmacists to really help patients. And so I think if we do legalize marijuana in Pennsylvania, we really have to incentivize medicinal marijuana and make it worth the patient paying to see me and be in the medical program versus just self-medicating and going to the dispensary.
And then, other question, this sort of comes back to cost as well. This is from Nancy. She asked, why, if I have a chronic incurable condition, must I get recertified by my doctor every year? I understand charging us for a new card, although I disagree with it, but I really don't get and can't afford why I should need to spend $150 every year to see my doctor separately from my quarterly visits to him. This is expensive for someone on a fixed income. Shalon, if you want to take that first, just the idea that you need an annual certification or repeat certifications at all.
Yeah, we are looking at that issue. We do find it to be redundant, and we are looking at ways to expand that. So instead of every year, maybe every 2 years or every 3 years, and maybe even adding to the certification process, like I am certifying that this patient is good for the next 3 years or the next 4 years. But I don't think we are going to ever get away from the recertification process. It's going to happen, but we are looking at ways to accommodate patients in understanding that it is costly to be recertified. And then we are also looking at what is the safest thing to do, because if we take away recertifications at all, what's to say that you don't have a condition? And so it can't be either or. The government or the legislation isn't going to make it so that it's either or. So it's either we're going to extend how often you have to get the recertification, which is what I think is the most appropriate thing to do. And we did some of that during COVID. COVID really opened our eyes to some of the things that we could do and could successfully do because of the pandemic. So I'm hoping that we will address that. I will bring it up again because it was something that was brought up a couple of meetings ago. And so I will bring it up at our next meeting to see where we are with that in terms of extending that certification process.
And then, yeah, Mary Frances and Judy, any thoughts about that issue of the annual certification versus whether it's 2 years, whether it's longer?
First I'll say I have heard from some patients where, again, these doctors may have been taking advantage of the situation or requiring them to recertify every 3 to 6 months, which I think is only under incredibly rare circumstances where maybe you're worried about somebody and like making sure you want to check in on them kind of a thing. I don't think that should be allowed. That said, I do think that there are some dangers that you could deal with in extending it as well. Patients get started on new medications, say a blood thinner or an SSRI, or, you want to check their mental health because maybe they're not being seen by a therapist and perhaps their bipolar is cycling and getting worse because of the medical marijuana. In general, just giving recommendations. I've had a number of patients, in fact, I had 2 today that, were using the wrong products and not really getting the most effective treatment they could. And that would be missed and not picked up if they weren't seeing, again, a qualified physician each year to kind of check in, make sure they're doing okay, review their medication lists, and quite frankly, sometimes their mental health before just issuing the certification each year. And I do think, again, as competition comes down, you're seeing the prices for new certifications, in the 50, one of the comments was 75 or $100, range. So, they do make the renewals more reasonably priced because, especially if you're known to that doctor, like in our practice, I know you, so I don't need to charge $150 for you to come back to me.
Yeah. And then, Judy, your thoughts about the annual certification versus longer periods?
I would just say that I believe it should be between the patient and the doctor. The program has an electronic system. It's called MJ Freeway. So if a doctor decides that this particular patient, given their conditions, needs or should come back in 6 months, they can put that into the system. If the patient then decides that they don't want to, they're going to have to find a new doctor. But that, I think, is the check and balance. It shouldn't be up to me or DOH or anybody else. It should be between the doctor and the patient to decide how frequently they need to see one another.
I would just like to comment on that. My only issue is that, if I see you this year and you're fine, I don't know what's happened between now and then. And I don't know that you've been started on Coumadin, right? So until I see you each year, I can't determine, should I see you back in a year or 2 years or 3? Maybe in the terminal patient, that might be, one scenario, but other than that, I can't say. I would have to say every year, just so I could have that checks and balances on it. And that's where I do think that, a yearly certification isn't a bad idea.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, speaking of checks and balance, we have another question about oversight for physicians. Lawrence asks, why doesn't the Department of Health, when appropriate, audit physicians who are registered to certify patients? This would be a means of helping to determine the legitimacy of that certification process. I've heard this got brought up in a testimony during a Senate hearing as well, the idea of routine audits for physicians in the program. Mary Frances, any thoughts about that idea, the department auditing physicians and auditing certifications?
I'm always a little hesitant when the word audit comes up. I think there is with all of us. Clearly, I have like such a tiny practice, and they audited mine, right, my website, and tore apart tiny little things that were just ridiculous, quite frankly, and that I think I argued quite rightfully that they should have been allowed. So, there comes power with audit. I think it needs to. That said, I do agree that we need some kind of checks and balances over who is providing these certifications, and are they doing it appropriately, following patients, etc. And there's really very little guideline in the law for doctors as far as what kind of care we're to provide. Do we have to have a medical record? I can just throw in a certification for anybody. There's really no guidelines right now. And some of the guidelines don't even make sense. And when I've called the department about them, they can't even answer. I'm like, you're telling me I need to provide them with a certification, a copy of it, but it's in their medical record. You want me to mail it to them? No answer. It says I need to download a copy into their medical record, but nowhere does it say I need to keep a medical record. And nowhere am I able to download it to the system, because I called them. I'm like, how am I supposed to download this? So they've got these rules and regulations that are inconsistent, impossible to actually do. And then they could audit me and say I'm not doing it. So I think before we get to the audit, we really need to get a clear set of rules that are explained to doctors, that are feasible for doctors to attain. I don't think they should be super restrictive, but I do think we need better education and some accountability that you're going to somebody who's really a medical marijuana physician, and not just picking up a few patients with one of these certification things to make a couple extra bucks on the weekend.
Yeah. And Shalon, I mean, so as Mary Frances, raised that, the department audit or whatever you want to call it, but her website, which, people have argued whether that's the important thing they should be focusing on. I mean, do you think the department is providing proper oversight of the patient-doctor relationship in its current system?
No.
Yeah.
That's the short answer. I think you have doctors like Mary Frances that really care, that are going to be seeing their patients. They're going to be following up with them. They're going to be assessing their mental health. They're going to be doing all of the things that they should be doing. And then you have doctors out there that unfortunately are doing a drive-by. I'm going to stop through this little small town and sell some certifications, and I'm going to be on to the next one in my RV through the weekend. That's horrible. And that makes me sad, because that is not what the program was intended to be. I think what we have here is a helicopter parent that wants the best for their kid. In essence, they want the best, but they're hovering too much and they're focusing on the wrong thing. And what you ultimately end up doing is you smother the kid, and you're smothering the patient, you're smothering the doctor. And so nobody wins in that situation. And then you get a maladaptive kid or program. It's what we have here. It's maladaptive because you have a helicopter parent. I think the intent was admirable. I think they wanted to put some protections in place, but you don't put in the most restrictive thing and then say, oh, it is what it is. But like Mary Frances, it doesn't make sense. You can't follow it. And at the end of the day, again, the patient suffers. The patient is always going to be the bearer of all of the bad of this system that doesn't work. There are things in the system that work great, work wonderful. Then there are things like this.
And then, and I appreciate that perspective. And so, Eva, I think you're all pretty much on the same page that these advertising restrictions are a problem. I want to ask, more broadly, are there things that should be changed, could be changed about the medical marijuana program? This can be this advertising issue. This can be anything you want to speak about. But we'll go around. I think this might be our last question of the evening. But Judith, if you want to speak first.
I don't want to take up another 6 hours, but I probably could. No, I would try to stay away from the weeds and just say over summary. I think most of the issues that we have as practitioners out here in the field with DOH is just that, one, the inconsistency that both of the other guests have brought up, but also a lack of really having the expertise in place on all these different areas to be able to draft regulations and draft guidance and provide in-field guidance that makes sense. All the inconsistencies and so forth, I believe, stem from just not having enough of the expertise, whether it's in laboratories or whether it is in physicians. I think they need to really hire the expertise in each one of those areas to develop the real meaningful guidance, and not just have overreaching auditing and supervision and compliance, but work with the industry participants to make the best experience for patients.
All right, great. And Mary Frances?
Yeah, I think that there needs to be much clearer regulations with physicians, so that we have a guideline to follow, because it's really muddied water and they could pretty much do and say whatever they want. And I've got examples of them doing that with really no explanation, right? Shutting down events, like a number of things where they just come in, they say, no, it's not allowed, or you're doing this and it's wrong. And there's no real clear set of rules to follow. And I want to follow the rules, but it's hard. And I've read the act like probably more times than I can count. And, it's still not clear what I need to keep, what records, what I need to do, what my responsibilities are. Am I allowed to recommend products? Am I not allowed to recommend products? Am I just certifying? And so I think we really need to set a clear set of standards across the board that all doctors have to follow. And again, I don't mean that to be restrictive. I just mean it to be clear. Then we need to look at like the ridiculousness of this, right? Like a lot of the regulations that, I talked about before, based on as if we were prescribing marijuana or selling it or something, like not being able to certify family members or ourselves, or not being a caregiver, not being able to advertise and say who we are. These are illogical regulations that don't make sense and don't benefit anybody. And so I think we need to go through and kind of look at those. This was written in 2016. It's a different era. We are starting to get more research. There are more doctors who are knowledgeable. There are universities studying it. The medical marijuana board should have input and should have knowledgeable members on it who can add real input to help make these laws better for everybody, to benefit everybody. Because yes, we've come a long way. I'm so happy this program exists. I really am. It's helped so many people, but we need to fine tune and tweak it a little bit. And these big companies, they really need to be addressed, because I think they're truly harmful and really delegitimize the program.
Okay. And then Shalane, just your perspective about broader changes for the program.
Cost, price gouging. We need more doctors. We definitely need the research. All things that could potentially change the way this program works. People are desperate. And I say this every time I talk to you. People are desperate, and when people are desperate, they do desperate things. And we have this system out here that essentially should work, but hundreds of thousands of dollars and this is $1 million industry. Millions of dollars are being spent on medical marijuana, and it's breaking people. It is breaking people. It's breaking their banks, and they're buying medical marijuana to avoid pain or to avoid medical issues. And we should be able to do something. We should be able to subsidize it in some way. We should be able to look at, is it necessary to make someone pay for a card every year? You don't get your license done every year. Like, you just don't. So like, does there have to be a cost for that? Everything can't be a cost, and everything shouldn't be a cost. And folks are out here like spending their life savings on medical marijuana and doing desperate things to get the drugs that they desperately need. And that is my biggest fear. And like Judith said, the legalization of legal marijuana, of recreational marijuana, is going to pull people from this program because the costs are so high if you can get it somewhere else for much cheaper.
Yeah, that sounds good. And we have a comment linking to a study exploring that very issue about people abandoning medical marijuana programs for illegal or recreational markets. I do have time for one more bonus question, and then we'll hand it back to Joanna. But if people want good information about medical marijuana, about where to find a doctor, or medical marijuana in general, where should they turn? Judith, we'll start with you, Mary Frances, and then Shalon.
The DOH does do a lot of things right. I know we were here criticizing them. The best thing that, and I'm absolutely honest about that, the best thing that DOH has ever done was to set up this advisory board, and they should listen to them more. I think I always participate in those meetings, and I think the board members have great things to say and contribute, but sometimes I feel like DOH isn't really listening. So that's number one. But where can people find physicians? DOH does have an excellent website. It's very easy to use. I find it very informative, and on there should be a list of physicians. I will note that a couple of the other guests have said how big this program is getting. Pennsylvania was supposed to be about 250,000 patients. We're approaching 800,000 patients now. So the program really needs to get a handle on some of these things before too long, because the program is expanding exponentially.
And Mary Frances, where should people go if they want good information about the program or about medical marijuana in general?
Medical marijuana in general, I think there are a lot of good resources just through a good old Google search, to be honest with you, not to name, but anybody in particular. My website has blogs and information and frequently asked questions. I know a lot of other practice websites do as well as even dispensaries provide a lot of good information and webinars on theirs, about different products and types and uses. So I think there's a lot of good information out there about medical marijuana and the program through a simple Google search. I think where we're really lacking is your second, how to find a doctor. The DOH list has telephone numbers, that's it, and addresses. There's no websites, which is really harmful, and we can't even put who we are on our websites, but we can, at least on Cannabis Care Consultants, I can say what our mission is as a practice, right? So it would be nice if at a very minimum we could put our websites, because that's where people are going. They're not going to go and call every single number. All it is a number and a name. It doesn't tell you who that person is. You know what I mean? So I think that's really where we're lacking, and I wish there was a better answer to that. I would just advise people to look closely at where you're getting your certification, because it does matter, especially if you have a medical condition. Don't just willy-nilly sign up for the cheapest or wherever it is. Look and check out, who you're going to the best you can.
Thank you. And then Shalana, if you can, where should people turn for information?
Yeah, I'm actually quite proud of the DOH website. We got a lot of feedback with it, and that's the one area where DOH did listen to us, and we had people go out on the website and use it, and we used it, and we were like, yeah, this is crappy, it takes you here, it's not a clear train of links, this needs to be better, and they listened. So I do think that the DOH website is a good website. Google is also a good place if you know how to filter through the good and the crap. There is some crap out there. It's just with anything that you Google, you got to kind of figure out what's the good stuff and how to get the gold and where's the dirt in between that. But DOH, and then combined with a Google search, you should get everything that you need. You should be able to kind of ascertain this is crap or no, this isn't crap. And then the actual medical Medscape, if you can get onto those where you're getting medical journals, John Hopkins, Hershey. There's a list of who the research industry universities are and who they're partnering with. Look at them and see what they're putting out. Those are great places to get good information on medical marijuana, and good places to figure out how to get involved in some of their studies.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Well, thank you all so much. It's really fascinating. Really appreciate all of your perspective. There's a lot here that I'll be hopefully following up on in the coming weeks and months to do more stories. So thanks again. Thanks to everybody else. I'll turn it back to Joanna.
Great. Thank you, Ed. Thank you so much to the panelists. We're at the end of our time together this evening, and I want to thank everyone for an essential and informative discussion. Central to the mission of Spotlight PA is ensuring that Pennsylvanians in all corners of the state, regardless of their financial resources, have access to trusted, nonpartisan, fact-based journalism to be informed, equipped, and empowered in everyday life. So, as we always say at the end of our events, this conversation was just the beginning. Regardless of where you stand on the issues discussed, please take what you learned today, continue to get informed, talk to your elected officials and neighbors, and continue to be engaged in our great state. Today's event was a free public service provided by Spotlight PA. And so this is the time I'd like to remind any of you who have not yet made a contribution and are able to do so, please go to spotlightpa.org/donate now. Contributions of any amount help us keep this programming free for all, and your support goes directly back into our journalism. Have a great rest of your week, and thank you again.